My name is Daniel Cross. I'm 66 years old, retired for barely a decade, and I thought the only battles left in my life were with creaky joints and stubborn tomato plants in my backyard. I was wrong. The real war began on a Wednesday morning at 9:17 a.m., when my phone rang and my attorney's number flashed across the screen. She never calls me. Ever. Her voice came through tight and controlled. Daniel, are you aware someone is trying to claim your inheritance as their own? And they're insisting you already gave them your consent. For a moment, I couldn't speak. My inheritance, everything my parents worked for, everything I protected for decades, was being claimed by someone else. I finally managed. Who? A pause. Your ex-wife's new husband. I felt my stomach drop. I barely knew the man. I'd shaken his hand once at a grocery store years ago. We exchanged polite smiles, nothing more. And now he was attempting to take what my family left behind, what I planned to pass to the next generation. I remember gripping the edge of my kitchen counter so hard my fingers went numb. Shock cracked into anger, and anger bled into something colder, fear. Because my attorney wasn't finished. They've already submitted documents with your signature on them. Documents I had never seen. Documents that could destroy everything I'd built. Before I explain how everything spiraled out of control, please subscribe if you enjoy real stories like mine, because this one becomes darker, uglier, and more unbelievable than anything I ever imagined happening at my age. Now, back to that moment. I stood alone in my silent house, staring at the old family photos on the wall, suddenly realizing every framed memory was at risk. My ex-wife and I hadn't spoken in nearly 8 years. Our divorce was stale history. We'd both moved on. At least I thought we had. What kind of person reaches back into someone's life after nearly a decade just to tear out the foundation? What kind of man marries a woman and then immediately looks at her former husband as a financial opportunity? The dread settled slowly, like dust after an explosion. If someone was bold enough to forge my signature, they were bold enough to do far worse. And this was only the beginning. After the call with my attorney, I walked through my house in a daze. The quiet felt heavier than usual, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. To understand why this attack on my inheritance hit so deeply, you need to know the life I've been living since the divorce, the life I built piece by fragile piece when everything else fell apart. I was 58 when the marriage ended. Not explosively, not dramatically, just hollowly. My ex-wife, Marlene, had spent years drifting away in silence, like a ghost that still cooked dinner and folded laundry but no longer lived inside her own skin. By the time she finally said she wanted a fresh start, I had already accepted I wasn't part of her future. Still, the divorce gutted me. The first year alone was the hardest. The house echoed differently. I'd reach for 2 plates, 2 cups, 2 chairs, muscle memory refusing to accept reality. I stopped hosting friends, stopped attending church potlucks. I kept to myself, partly out of exhaustion, partly because I didn't know how to explain a divorce that had no villain and no hero, just absence. But slowly, I rebuilt. I started gardening. Not for beauty, just for purpose. I tended tomatoes, peppers, stubborn rose bushes that refused to bloom. They gave my days structure. I joined a small chess group at the community center. I became that quiet guy who always plays Sicilian defense. It wasn't glamorous, but it was grounding. Financially, I lived simply. My pension was stable, my savings conservative. My parents had left me their home, fully paid off, and a modest inheritance tucked into an account I never touched except on Memorial Day, when I added flowers to their grave. That inheritance wasn't just money. It was legacy. Responsibility. The last thread connecting me to the people who raised me. And I protected it fiercely. I kept my documents organized in a locked drawer. I checked my accounts monthly. I lived within my means. I never remarried. I never mingled finances with anyone. I trusted very few people, and even then, cautiously. Which is why my attorney's warning felt like a punch to the ribs. Someone had crawled into the quiet life I'd rebuilt, into my peace, and tried to carve out the only financial foundation I still had. Marlene's new husband. What did he gain by tearing into my life 8 years after she left? Whatever the answer was, I knew this: he hadn't just targeted my money. He had targeted my history. And that made him dangerous. I didn't see Marlene for almost 8 years after the divorce. Not accidentally, not briefly, nothing. We lived in the same city, but it felt like we existed on different planets. I assumed it would stay that way. Our lives had split so cleanly it almost felt intentional. Then, out of nowhere, she knocked on my door on a breezy Sunday afternoon. I had just finished mowing the lawn when I heard her voice call my name, soft, almost apologetic. When I turned, she stood on the walkway wearing the same gentle smile she used to soften before asking for something big. For a second, my brain couldn't reconcile the image. Marlene didn't visit. Didn't call. Didn't send Christmas cards. She didn't even send the email she promised to explain why things ended the way they did. Yet here she was. "Daniel," she said, hands clasped together like she was afraid I might shut the door in her face. "You look good." I didn't, but I appreciated the effort. She started with small talk: the garden, the weather, the neighborhood. Nothing meaningful, nothing revealing. Just noise. But beneath her voice was an energy I recognized too well, tension disguised as warmth. Eventually, she stopped pretending. "I'd really like us to reconnect," she said. "Would you come to dinner tomorrow night? My home. I'd like you to meet my husband properly." Husband. I had forgotten she'd remarried so quickly after the divorce. I remembered a blurry social media post of their wedding. A man with a polished smile and too much confidence wrapped around him like cologne. I never learned his name. I never cared to. Something in her eyes told me this wasn't about reconciliation or old memories. The invitation had a purpose. But curiosity, mixed with a strange, reluctant nostalgia, won out. I agreed. The next night confirmed every suspicion I'd had. Their home looked like a showroom: polished hardwood floors, staged pillows, spotless surfaces. Not a single trace of real life. Her husband, Victor, greeted me like we were old friends, gripping my hand with a rehearsed warmth that didn't extend to his eyes. "I've heard so much about you, Daniel," he said, guiding me inside with an overbearing cheerfulness. The dinner felt off from the beginning. Marlene was tense, constantly adjusting cutlery and napkins as though keeping her hands busy prevented something from cracking inside her. Victor, meanwhile, wasted no time pulling me into pointed conversations. "So, you're fully retired. You still live alone. You handle your own finances. Any plans for estate adjustments as you get older?" He asked these questions with the casual tone of friendly conversation, but each one struck like a probe searching for a structural weakness. I'd barely swallowed my first bite of food before I realized the dinner wasn't about reconnecting. It was an evaluation. I left that night with a cold tightness in my chest, sensing I had just stepped into something far bigger, and far more dangerous, than an awkward dinner with an ex-wife. The moment I stepped into their dining room, a cold uneasiness settled into my gut. The table looked like something out of a catalog: perfectly folded napkins, wine glasses aligned with military precision, candles lit but giving off no warmth. Everything looked staged, like a set prepared for someone else's life. Marlene hovered nervously behind me, smoothing the same wrinkle on her dress over and over. Victor, in contrast, moved around the room with a confidence that grated, like he'd practiced hosting in front of a mirror. "Please, sit," he said, guiding me to a chair position directly across from him. It wasn't a family table. It was an interrogation setup. The food tasted fine, but bland, completely forgettable. The atmosphere was the opposite, unforgettable in the worst way. Victor leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes fixed on me with a focus that made my skin crawl. "Tell me, Daniel," he began casually, "do you ever find it difficult keeping up with home maintenance at your age?" Marlene's fork clattered onto her plate. "Victor." He waved her off gently but firmly. I gave a polite smile. "I manage." "Impressive," he said. "Most men your age start delegating. Estate management gets complicated when you get older. Legal documents, property upkeep, handling accounts, that sort of thing." He paused. "Do you handle all of that on your own?" The question landed like a hammer. I noticed Marlene's posture go rigid, her eyes glued to her plate. She was terrified he'd pushed too far. But Victor continued, lips curling into a too-friendly smile. "I'm asking because I work with a lot of seniors in advisory roles. Many of them struggle without support. Especially if they don't have children of their own." It wasn't advice. It was a probe. A test. A way of measuring how vulnerable I might be. I gave non-committal answers, letting his words wash over me without revealing anything. The more he talked, the more he exposed the truth he was trying to conceal. He wasn't curious, he was calculating. Every question chipped away at the facade. "Do you have any health issues? Have you updated your will recently? Anyone you trust enough to handle things if something happened to you?" Marlene's silence was the worst part. Her eyes darted between him and me with a guilt so sharp it practically radiated across the table. She knew what he was doing. She knew why. And yet, she said nothing. The man had only known me for an hour, yet he behaved like he already had a claim to my life. To my future. To what my parents left behind. When dinner finally ended, Victor walked me to the door, clapping a hand on my shoulder as if granting me mercy. "Don't be a stranger, Daniel," he said warmly. "We should talk more. We have shared interests." Shared interests. The word sat like ice in my stomach. As I drove home, one truth crystallized. Victor wasn't trying to know me. He was examining me. And men who examine other men's lives this closely usually intend to take something. I tried to shake off the uneasiness from that dinner, but it lingered like a stain I couldn't scrub out. For 2 days, I kept replaying Victor's questions in my head, each one more intrusive than the last. I told myself I was overthinking it. Men like him enjoyed flexing their knowledge, flaunting their confidence. Maybe that was all it was. But the world has a way of confirming your instincts. It started with my neighbor, Carol. She's in her 70s, sharp as a blade, and she watches everything happening on our street with a keen, protective instinct. As I stepped outside to water my rose bushes, she waved me over from her porch. "Daniel," she said in a low voice, "was someone supposed to stop by your house yesterday evening?" "No," I replied. "Why?" Her eyes narrowed. "A man was walking around your backyard. Tall, dark jacket. He didn't knock on the door. Just looked around and left." My stomach tightened. "Did you recognize him?" She hesitated. "Could have been that man from the dinner photo. The husband. The one you mentioned." I didn't tell her the part about the questions he asked. I didn't want to worry her, and I didn't want to admit how unsettled I actually felt. But her words lodged in my mind like a splinter. That night, another small disturbance, my mailbox door hanging open, the hinge bent slightly. I'd always been meticulous about closing it. Inside, one of my bank statements was torn at the edge, as if someone had opened it carelessly and stuffed it back in a hurry. Still, I told myself it could have been a postal mistake. It happens. But the next morning, my email inbox told a different story. A security alert from my bank. Password reset attempt detected. Someone had tried to access my online account at 2 in the morning. I stared at the notification for a long time, a cold weight settling in my chest. Elderly people get hacked often, sure, but I wasn't careless. And no stranger could possibly know enough about me to break into my finances. Only someone who had tried to study me. Only someone who asked targeted questions about my accounts. My home. My health. My solitude. The final blow came when my phone lit up with an unfamiliar number. I answered cautiously. Daniel. Victor's voice boomed through the speaker, far too cheerful. Just checking on you, buddy. You were on my mind. Buddy. On his mind. The timing wasn't a coincidence. Not after everything else. In that moment, I knew the dinner wasn't the beginning, it was the opening move. And someone was already advancing on the next one. The morning the truth finally surfaced, I had just sat down with a cup of coffee when my attorney called again. I expected a follow-up about the suspicious attempts to access my bank account. Instead, what she said nearly caused me to drop the mug. Daniel, we received a notification from the county clerk's office. A legal authorization form was filed under your name yesterday. I froze. What kind of authorization form? A financial consent directive, she said carefully. A document giving another party limited authority to access or oversee your assets. It lists your ex-wife's husband as the appointed proxy. My heart slammed against my ribs. I never signed anything like that. I know, she said quietly. Which is why I requested a copy.
There was a rustle of paper on her end. Daniel, the document has your signature on it. Everything inside me went cold. She emailed me a scanned version. When the notification popped up, my hand shook as I clicked it open. And there it was, my signature. My looping D, my precise C, the slight upward tilt at the end of my last name. It looked authentic. Terrifyingly authentic. But I hadn't signed a damn thing. I stared at it until the room felt as if it were tilting. Then something even more disturbing caught my eye, the date. It claimed I signed it 10 days ago, the night I'd had dinner at their house. My mind replayed that evening with sickening clarity. Victor handing me a thick photo album of old vacation pictures Marlene supposedly wanted me to see. Him flipping pages for me, talking non-stop, distracting me. A single sheet tucked between 2 pages, glossy like a photograph, which he placed in front of me briefly. A pen in his hand. Sign the back of this one so we can label the photo for Marlene, he'd said casually. I had barely glanced at it. My guard was down. The nostalgia had softened me. I scribbled my signature without reading a word. That wasn't a photo. It was the authorization form. My pulse roared in my ears. I called my attorney immediately. She listened in silence as I described the moment in detail. When I finished, she exhaled sharply. Daniel, that wasn't an accident. You were deceived. This is coercion, manipulation, and it crosses into elder financial exploitation. Exploitation. The word punched through me. I had never felt old until that moment. Never felt vulnerable. Never imagined someone could lure me into signing something under the guise of harmless sentiment. And the worst part? My ex-wife had been there. She saw it. She knew. Her silence at the dinner table suddenly had a much darker meaning. My attorney continued, her tone hardening. The document is invalid because it was acquired through deceit. But the fact that they attempted to file it means they're already deeply invested in taking your inheritance. They're escalating. I swallowed hard. What do we do now? We gather evidence, she said. But Daniel, you need to understand something. People don't fake signatures and file legal documents unless they're desperate. And desperate people don't stop by themselves. She was right. Someone had crossed a line most people never even approach. Someone had looked at my life, my savings, my parents' legacy, and decided it was fair game. The forged signature was no longer just a warning. It was a declaration of intent. And I knew then that the real fight had only just begun. I didn't want to relive that night, but once I stared at the forged document long enough, the memory surfaced with painful clarity, every detail sharp, undeniable, and humiliating. It happened right after dinner, when Marlene was clearing plates and Victor suggested we move to the living room. He insisted on showing me something nostalgic. At the time, the gesture felt disarming. Almost kind. He brought out a large photo album, thick and heavy, the kind couples make when they're trying to preserve the best parts of a fractured history. He placed it on my lap like he was presenting a gift. "You'll appreciate these," he said. "Marlene found some old pictures from your early years together." For a moment, I felt something I rarely felt toward him, gratitude. I thought maybe he was crossing a bridge, trying to be decent. Every page was filled with memories I hadn't seen in decades. My wedding day. Our first apartment. The old camping trip where we got rained out. Marlene's eyes glistened as she watched me flip through them, but there was something strange beneath her expression, something tight, conflicted. I should have noticed that. But I was too lost in the past to see the present unfolding in front of me. Halfway through the album, Victor placed a loose sheet directly onto the open page. I remember it distinctly now, sleek, glossy paper, just like the photos. It had a small rectangle printed at the top, made to look like a label section for writing captions. "There's no name on this one," he said. "Could you just sign the back so we can mark which trip it was? Marlene's organizing everything." I didn't hesitate. My guard was completely down. My emotions were on display like open wounds, and Victor slipped the blade in with surgical precision. I flipped the sheet over, signed the empty rectangle, and handed it back without reading a single word. I can still see the faint tremble in Marlene's hands as she took it. I thought it was nostalgia. Now I know it was guilt. Victor closed the album gently, almost ceremonially, and said, "Perfect. This helps a lot." "Helps with what?" I never asked. I never imagined a single signature, just a quick flick of my wrist, could become the centerpiece of a crime. But that was the moment everything changed. That was the moment I unknowingly signed a document giving another man access to my life. A signature forged by my own hand. And the moment I realized that betrayal doesn't always come with shouting or violence. Sometimes it comes with photo albums, soft memories. And a pen. I've lived long enough to know that fear can paralyze you, but it can also wake up parts of you that have been asleep for years. After discovering that forged authorization, something inside me shifted. The grief, the shock, the humiliation, those feelings didn't disappear. They hardened. They crystallized into focus. I wasn't always an easy target. Before retirement, I worked nearly 40 years as a property assessor, evaluating values, identifying fraud, catching discrepancies most people overlooked. I spent my entire career reading the fine print others ignored. That part of me had been dormant, buried under routine and quiet hobbies. But now, it slammed back into place like a steel trap. I pulled out my old lockbox, the one holding decades of documents and family records, and spread everything across the dining table. Birth certificates. Insurance policies. My parents' handwritten will. The sealed envelope containing the inheritance letter I kept since the day they passed. Everything had meaning. Everything had value. And I needed to examine every inch of it. I started with my bank accounts. Every transaction was reviewed, documented, and filed. I checked my retirement statements line by line. Nothing unauthorized, yet. Victor's attempts were early, clumsy, but intentional. It made my skin crawl imagining how far he was willing to go. Then I compared my signature on old documents with the one on the forged authorization. The differences were subtle, but they were there, the pressure of the pen, the width of the line, even the slight hesitation before the first initial. Victor hadn't forged it himself. He'd gotten me to do it. That was his trick. His loophole. And that meant only one thing. He understood exactly how to exploit a moment of emotional vulnerability. I catalogued every interaction from the dinner, every comment, every look, every hesitation from Marlene. The guilt in her eyes had a weight now. She hadn't just been uncomfortable, she had been complicit. Maybe unwilling, maybe pressured, but complicit nonetheless. I opened my notebook, the same kind I used during my assessment days, and began writing. Motive. Opportunity. Access. Behavior. Timeline. My hand was steady. My breathing calm. The storm inside had transformed from chaos into strategy. By the time I finished the first page, one truth stood out above all else. Victor didn't want to steal my money. He wanted control over my entire future, my house, my inheritance, my autonomy. My life. And I knew something else too. People like him don't stop after one successful deception. They escalate. This wasn't just a forged document. This was a blueprint of an attack. And I wasn't going to sit quietly and wait for the next move. Before I go any further, let me say this: if you've ever dealt with manipulative family members or enjoy stories where the truth eventually rips the mask off the guilty, make sure you subscribe. I share these experiences not just to unburden myself, but to warn others who might be walking blindfolded into the same traps I nearly fell into. Now, with that out of the way, let me tell you what happened next, because the moment I contacted my attorney and she began digging, the entire situation shifted from unsettling to explosive. The morning after I finished reviewing my documents, I called my attorney, Ms. Halpern, and asked if she could meet in person. I'd worked with her on small matters for years, property disputes, insurance renewals, but I had never heard her voice take on the tone it carried that day. Concern. Precision. Readiness. She told me to come immediately. Her office was quiet, sunlit, impeccably organized. When I stepped inside, she closed the door behind me with a soft but decisive click. "Sit," she said, not unkindly. "Tell me everything." I placed the forged authorization form on her desk. Then I told her about the dinner, the photo album, the disguised sheet of paper, Victor's forced friendliness. I described Marlene's trembling hands, the probing questions, the password reset attempt, the prowler Carol saw in my backyard. She said nothing as I spoke. Her pen scratched across her legal pad in sharp, deliberate strokes. When I finished, she pushed her glasses up her nose and leaned back slowly. "Daniel," she began, choosing her words with surgical precision, "this is not an isolated incident. This is a coordinated attempt to seize control of your assets. And because you're over 65, it falls under the category of potential elder financial exploitation." Hearing it put so plainly made my stomach twist. But before I could respond, she continued. "We need to get ahead of them. Right now." She reached for a file drawer and pulled out a stack of forms and legal documents. "First, we file a fraud alert on your behalf with all 3 major credit bureaus. That blocks any new loans or accounts from being opened under your name." My heart thudded. "You think they'd try something that big?" She gave me a look that said, "Yes. And worse." "Second," she continued, "we request copies of the notary logs for the authorization form. Whoever notarized it, we need to know their relationship to Victor." That possibility made my blood run cold. If he had a notary on his side, this scheme wasn't new, it was rehearsed. "Third," she said, "we check public records to see if anyone has attempted to file liens, transfers, or ownership claims on your property. And Daniel," she paused. "We also need to check if any financial institutions have received inquiries in your name." My mouth felt dry. "He's trying to take out loans against my inheritance, isn't he?" "I'd bet on it," she replied. "And people like him don't stop at one attempt, they batter the system until something gives." She printed out authorization forms for me to sign, real ones, this time, granting her access to investigate on my behalf. As I signed each page carefully, she monitored the line of my pen, as if reassuring herself I wasn't being tricked again. When we finished, she stood, opened a separate folder, and handed me a small card. "This is a private investigator I trust, a former fraud detective. He's discreet. He'll start pulling background on Victor immediately. Employment history. Debt records. Legal trouble. Associates." I swallowed. "You think Victor has done this before?" "I think Victor doesn't suddenly wake up one day and forge a signature," she said. "Predators test the smallest boundaries before committing to the biggest crime. And if he targeted you, it's because he thinks you're isolated enough to take." A flush of humiliation and anger passed through me. But beneath it, something steadier bloomed, a quiet, controlled determination. "We'll build a wall around your assets," she said firmly. "And then we'll expose exactly what he's been planning." For the first time in days, I felt like I wasn't standing alone. But as I left her office, one truth echoed in my mind. If Victor had gone this far already, he wasn't going to stop just because we discovered his first move. By the time I returned home from Miss Halpern's office, the quiet didn't feel comforting anymore, it felt strategic. Like the house itself was waiting for my next move. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I had a plan forming in my mind. Not a desperate reaction. Not blind fear. A methodical, step-by-step counterattack. That night, Miss Halpern called again, her voice sharper than before. "Daniel, I've reviewed the notary logs. There's something you need to hear." I sat up straighter, bracing myself. "The notary who stamped that fraudulent authorization is a woman named Helena Park. She works from home. And she's a close friend of Victor's sister." My jaw clenched. So it was a network. This wasn't some impulsive act by a reckless opportunist. It was a coordinated attempt, people working together, helping him inch closer to my inheritance like termites chewing through the beams of a house. "That tells me," she continued, "this was planned long before that dinner. He's been watching you. Gathering information. Strategizing." Hearing it out loud made my skin crawl, but it also solidified something inside me. "What do we do?" I asked. "We turn his own strategy against him," she said. "Piece by piece." And that's exactly what she laid out. Step 1. Place a full financial freeze on every account tied to my name, bank, retirement, credit, brokerage. That prevented any unauthorized access or credit applications, locking every door Victor might try to pry open. Step 2. File a formal fraud report with the state's Elder Protection Agency. Once that system is alerted, any financial institution that receives suspicious activity tied to my name is legally required to flag it. Victor wouldn't see the walls closing, but they'd be closing all the same. Step 3. Issue a cease and desist letter to Helena, the notary, demanding her full cooperation and documentation. As an officer of the state, she'd be forced to defend her actions, or expose Victor's scheme. Step 4. Initiate a preliminary property protection order. This was critical. It created a legal shield around my house and inheritance, preventing any liens, title transfers, or loans from being processed until the investigation concluded. Step 5. Gather proof of coercion. She instructed me to write everything down, dates, conversations, tone of voice, gestures, exact wording at the dinner. The more detailed, the better. But her last instruction was the hardest to swallow. "Daniel," she said, "under no circumstances can you confront Victor or Marlene. If they realize you've uncovered their plan, they'll panic. They'll destroy evidence. They'll accelerate their attempts. You must stay silent. Silent. Pretending ignorance while my ex-wife's husband tried to devour my life from the shadows." The humiliation burned, but the logic was undeniable. To beat a man like Victor, I needed to let him think he was winning. For now. Because this was no longer just about protecting my inheritance. This was about making sure he regretted the moment he ever decided to target me. Walking up to Marlene and Victor's house the following Sunday felt like stepping into an ambush I wasn't allowed to acknowledge. My attorney's warning echoed in my mind with every step. Do not confront them. Not yet. So I rehearsed the role I needed to play, soft-spoken, unsuspecting, slightly confused. A man who still believed the best in people. A man Victor would continue to underestimate. When Marlene opened the door, her smile faltered for a fraction of a second, guilt flickered behind it like a light about to burn out. She recovered quickly, ushering me inside with a shaky warmth. Daniel, you came. I wasn't sure. You invited me, I said gently. Of course I came. That was the first lie. But certainly not the last. The house looked the same as before, polished, curated, eerily spotless. A home staged for visitors, not lived in. But the atmosphere had shifted. Marlene moved around like a shadow trying not to cast itself. Victor, however, he radiated the same smug confidence, the confidence of a man who believed he'd already won. Good to see you again, he boomed, gripping my shoulder a bit too tightly. I was hoping we could pick up where we left off. I forced a grin. Sure. Why not? He didn't waste time. Dinner hadn't even been served before he began circling the topics he wanted, my finances, my estate, my future planning. His questions were smoother now, wrapped in faux concern. You know, he said casually, pouring wine, men your age often worry about things getting overwhelming. It can be helpful to put someone trustworthy in charge. Just to ease the burden. Marlene's hand trembled as she set down a bowl of salad. She wouldn't look at me. At him. At anything. I watched their dynamic closely, her avoidance, his relentless probing, the tension underneath every polite exchange. Every detail was evidence. Every moment confirmed what my attorney already suspected, they were deep in this together. I've been thinking about your situation a lot this week, Victor continued. If you ever need help managing things, I'd be glad to step in. Family takes care of family, right? Family. The audacity nearly made me choke. But I kept my expression mild, my voice light. That's kind of you. I've had a lot on my mind lately. Oh. His eyes flickered with excitement. Anything you want to talk about? Another lie formed easily. Just, aging things. You know how it is. He smiled, thinking he'd nudged me closer to surrender. Throughout the meal, he fished for any sign of vulnerability, mental, emotional, financial. And I gave him crumbs. Just enough to keep him invested in the version of me he wanted to see. When dessert was served, he finally said it. We should get together soon to go over some paperwork. Simple stuff. Streamlining things for you. Streamlining, my ass. But I nodded. Sure. Just let me know. As I left their house, the cool night air hit me like freedom. I had played my part convincingly. Victor still believed I was blind. He had no idea every word he said, every subtle manipulation, was ammunition I would soon use to destroy him. 3 days after that staged dinner, Miss Halpern called me again. Her tone was different this time, not cautious, not investigative, but sharpened with purpose. Daniel, she said, we have enough. Enough to expose the scheme. Enough to corner Victor. Enough to crush whatever fraud he thought he'd get away with. We're going to bring them in, she continued. Victor, Marlene, and the notary who approved the forged authorization. And then what? I asked. She exhaled, slow and deliberate. Then we dismantle their plan in front of them. The meeting was scheduled for Friday morning. When I arrived at her office that day, there was already a tension humming in the air, like static before a storm. The conference room table was set with folders, thick, heavy, and ominous. One had my name on it. Another, Victor's. Ms. Halpern motioned for me to sit beside her. You don't speak unless I tell you to. You've done your part. A few minutes later, Marlene and Victor walked in. Marlene looked hollow, eyes rimmed red, shoulders slumped. She avoided my gaze entirely. Victor, however, strode in with the smug swagger of a man who believed he was attending a polite mediation. He even extended his hand as if this were some friendly negotiation. I didn't take it. He smirked. Still upset about the little misunderstanding? Misunderstanding. The word was so absurd I almost laughed. But then the door opened again, and the notary walked in, Helena Park. Her confidence evaporated the moment she saw the folder with her name on it. She sat down stiffly, clutching her purse with both hands. Ms. Halpern began by placing a thick binder in the center of the table with a satisfying thud. This, she said, is the complete record of fraudulent actions taken against my client. Victor rolled his eyes. Oh please. Sit, she snapped, without raising her voice. He froze. She opened the binder. First, the forged financial authorization, deceptively obtained and notarized under false pretenses. She slid the document toward him. His jaw tightened. Second, the notary logs showing Helena notarized your signature despite having a personal connection to you. That violates state law, Helena. The notary went pale. Third, the attempted access to Mr. Cross's financial accounts, documented by digital forensics. The IP address traces back to your home, Victor. He shifted in his seat, suddenly less comfortable. Fourth, property lien inquiries submitted in the week following your family dinner. Marlene gasped quietly, apparently, she hadn't known that part. And finally, she said, lifting her eyes to Victor, the formal complaint filed with the Elder Protection Agency, which places you under investigation for elder financial exploitation. That involves prison time. The words hit him like a physical blow. Even his arrogance couldn't hide the flicker of panic that crossed his face. Now, she continued calmly, you're going to listen very carefully to what happens next. She paused, letting the silence sharpen. Mr. Cross will not be pressing criminal charges, yet. But you will sign a legally binding agreement stating that you will never contact him again, never approach his home, and never attempt to access his financial or legal affairs. She turned to the notary. You will surrender your commission within 48 hours or face a full investigation into your misconduct. Helena nodded, trembling. And Marlene? My ex-wife looked up slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks. You will provide a written affidavit detailing Victor's involvement, including the moment he deceived Mr. Cross into signing the document disguised within the photo album. Marlene covered her face with her hands and sobbed, quiet, broken sobs that held more shame than grief. Victor slammed his fist on the table. You can't force us. We can, Ms. Halpern replied evenly, and we will. If you refuse to comply, the criminal charges move forward. Elder exploitation. Forgery. Fraud. Conspiracy. You won't walk away from those. The room went silent. Victor's confidence drained out of him as the weight of the evidence settled around him like shackles. He looked at Marlene, perhaps expecting support, but she was already reaching for the pen lying on the table. Within minutes, the signatures were on paper. Agreements sealed. Consequences set in motion. As the three of them filed out of the room, heads bowed, steps unsteady, I felt something I hadn't felt since this nightmare began. Control. Power reclaimed. Justice starting to breathe. The demolition wasn't loud or violent. It was quiet. Calculated. A destruction built from truth and precision. And Victor never saw it coming. When the door closed behind Victor, Marlene, and the disgraced notary, the room felt strangely lighter, like someone had finally opened a window after weeks of suffocating air. For the first time since this nightmare began, my shoulders loosened. My heartbeat slowed. The storm inside me settled into something clearer, steadier. But peace doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in pieces. The first piece came the next morning, when Miss Halpern called with an update. The agreements are filed. Victor's barred from contacting you. Helena surrendered her notary license. And Marlene's affidavit is officially recorded. It was done. The legal trap they'd built for me had collapsed right under their feet. Still, the emotional debris took longer to sift through. For days, I replayed everything, the dinner, the forged signature, the lies, the calculated manipulation. I kept asking myself how a man I barely knew had wormed his way this deep into my life, and how the woman I once loved had stood silently beside him as he tried to steal everything my parents left me. But grief eventually gave way to clarity. I drove to the cemetery where my parents were buried. I sat between their headstones and told them everything, how close I'd come to losing their legacy, how I nearly signed it away without realizing it, how a stranger thought he could turn me into prey simply because I was older and alone. I protected it, I said quietly, running my hand over the cold stone. I protected everything you built for me. And I won't let anyone come near it again. That promise became another piece of peace. The final piece arrived in my own home, my quiet, steady sanctuary. I changed the locks. I organized every document. I put new security measures in place. I reclaimed the space not with fear, but with ownership. The life I'd built after the divorce wasn't broken after all. It just needed reinforcing. And with Victor gone for good, with every legal barrier locked in place, the silence in my home finally felt like it used to. Safe. Mine. Uninterrupted. No shadows lingering at the edges. No vultures circling for an opportunity. Just a man in his 60s, reclaiming the life someone else tried to rewrite. When everything finally settled, I found myself sitting alone at my kitchen table one evening, the same place where I'd stood in shock the morning my attorney first called. Only this time, the silence didn't feel threatening. It felt earned. I kept thinking about how close I came to losing everything, my home, my inheritance, the last gift my parents left behind. All because one man saw my age as weakness. Because he believed someone in their 60s could be manipulated, tricked, pushed aside without consequence. But he underestimated the wrong old man. The truth is, aging doesn't make you fragile. It makes you aware. It sharpens your instincts. It teaches you to recognize the difference between nostalgia and manipulation, between love and leverage, between a helping hand and a closed fist. That's what Victor never understood. He thought he was dealing with someone fading, someone softened by time. But I've lived long enough to know that survival isn't loud. It isn't dramatic. It's patient. It's deliberate. It's choosing to stand your ground even when someone you once loved stands on the opposite side. And as for Marlene, her silence cut deeper than anything Victor did. Betrayal from a stranger stings. Betrayal from someone who once promised to share a lifetime with you. That leaves a mark you don't forget. But forgiveness doesn't require reunion, and closure doesn't require conversation. It simply requires the courage to walk away. If there's one thing I learned from all this, it's that protecting what's yours isn't selfish, it's necessary. No matter your age, your history, your mistakes, you deserve to keep the life you built with your own hands. Before I end this story, let me say this. If you've faced manipulation, pressure, or someone trying to take what doesn't belong to them, your savings, your home, your peace, you're not alone. And you're not powerless. I rebuilt my life once after a divorce. I rebuilt it again after this betrayal. And now, it stands stronger than ever. If you enjoy real stories like mine, or you want to hear more about how to protect yourself from people like Victor, make sure to subscribe. And tell me, what would you have done in my shoes?